the great conservative movement of America and of our time. A brush fire of freedom is being lit all over this country. We, as an irate, tireless American populace, will overcome the few radical leftists that control the levers of power today. Joe Biden's failed economic policies has given us inflation like you can't believe, and the border is in disarray.
It's amazing how few of the people commenting on this have actually bothered to go see what's happening. Well, Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona actually went to the border.
Biggs, where's Andy? Boy, oh boy, Andy. There's a guy. He's tough.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of What's the Biggs Idea, our regular podcast. Today's topic will be Biden's failing economy, inflation, and I am so honored to have with us today a very special guest, someone I've had the opportunity many times to talk to about the economy and what's going on in this country. He is a tremendous, not just is he a great economist, he is a distinguished fellow at the Heritage Foundation, senior economist at FreedomWorks. He's the founder of Club for Growth. This guy, you've seen him on TV. He talks and he teaches Americans about what's going on. And so we're going to talk today about everything from the failing economy, the 401ks that are under attack, and the inflation, what he calls the Inflation Acceleration Act, which is actually what it does. And Steve, thanks for being with me today.
Andy, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for what you do in the Freedom Caucus and really being a voice of fiscal sanity in a sea of socialism in Washington.
Yeah, it is. Sometimes you feel like it's overflowing the edges, that sea of socialism. So you've mentioned that President Biden dismantled the nation's energy supply, devalued our currency, has run up the debt by multiple trillions of dollars. Tell us, how did he do it? And tell us how what that means for Americans and how we're going to overcome that.
Well, Andy, oftentimes, I'm sure you experience this too, when I travel around the country and talk about what's happened to our country under this god-awful president that we have. People always ask me, do you think that this is intentional? In other words, do people wonder, are they actually trying to destroy the economy? And I always say, I don't think it's intentional. I don't like to get into people's motivations. And by the way, usually, especially if it's like a FreedomWorks crowd or a conservative crowd, I ask people, do you think it's intentional? About 75% of people raise their hand. But the point I made in that article that went viral that you've mentioned, Andy, is that if it were intentional, they're doing a pretty good job of it, right? I mean, everything they have done has really done great damage to our economy. So the point I made in my article is, if you wanted to destroy a country, what would you do? What would you do if you were a Dr. Evil, Dr. Evil from Austin Powers? And so, I went down the list. The first thing you would do is something you just mentioned. You destroy the country's energy supply, because everything we have, all our production, is dependent on energy. And I think everybody would agree that Biden's done a very good job of that by declaring war on American oil and gas and coal, where we got, almost 3/4 of our energy comes from those sources. And I was proud under Trump that we had become completely energy independent. He thought was possible when he left office. Now we have to get our energy from Russia, from Saudi Arabia, from Venezuela, Iran, and other OPEC countries that hate us. So he's done a pretty good job on that, of destroying our energy supply. The second thing you would do, as you just mentioned, is you destroy the nation's financial structure. And as you know, you voted against all of this spending, but Biden has added $5 trillion of debt. I love when Biden says, I'm reducing the deficit. What the hell is he talking about? $5 trillion of debt has been added. And that is done. I mean, I think, Andy, that it's not just years, but decades to undo the damage that Biden has done to our country and the Democrats. The third thing you would do is you would debase a currency. And obviously that's what inflation is, right? Inflation is a way to debase the value of the dollars are the currencies you have, and so we have 8, 9, 10% inflation under Biden. I could go through the rest. One that's of particular importance to you and your voters in your residence there in Arizona is you would lose control of your border. You don't have a country without a border, right? And I'm very pro-immigration, but you can't just have anybody who wants to come over the border come in. And so that's happened. And then, of course, you'd allow criminals out of jail and that kind of thing. They've done that, So I think there's others, but that you get the point I'm making.
Yeah, I mean, and I thought your article, your column was so prescient because, I mean, you've nailed it. I mean, recently I was reading a book called The Disintegration of China, and it talks about the disintegration of nations. What does it look like? And this everything you mentioned in your column is we're talking loss of territorial integrity, loss of economic integrity, loss of the rule of law. All of those things that this administration has done that has catapulted us over the edge to this precarious position that we're in, quite frankly, of a crossroads in this nation, of an existential crisis, actually.
So, yeah, I agree. And I wanted to mention one other one that I think may be frightening of all. And I don't know if you agree with me or disagree with me on this one, but the other thing that tyrants do when they want to destroy a country and take over control of a country is that they weaponize the justice system, the FBI. I mean, basically what Biden has done is he has weaponized the FBI, the IRS, the Justice Department, the courts in a way that is they're basically putting people in jail for political reasons that they don't like. That's what tyrants do. That's what third world banana republic leaders do. And we're seeing this over and over again. And, I worked for Trump, and I guess these days that makes you a criminal if you work for, and my friend Peter Navarro was right. I mean, they came and they with guns and they put him in chains and they arrested him. He's not guilty of any crime except that he worked for Trump. And I have to tell you, I have nightmares that I'm going to hear a pounding on my door one of these days, and there are going to be 6 FBI agents with machine guns there. So I don't know about you. I find that to be incredibly frightening.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's not an economic issue per se, but what it is it gets to the guts and heart of what made the United States different.
Exactly.
And that's that rule of law thing. I'll just tell you a story. I mean, it'll tell the whole world. I have a neighbor in Alexandria, and a light. She's got this motion detector light, and I'm in a flight path of helicopters. Right, every night about 2 in the morning, 1 in the morning, the helicopters go over. And one night, the light goes on about 1 in the morning, 1:30 in the morning, and the helicopters are flying overhead. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is the time the FBI is coming.
They're coming to get you.
Yeah, exactly. Because we've seen our friends have this happen to them. They're dragged out in the street by the FBI. You have more than 20 pro-lifers just for protesting arrested. So you're right. I mean, it undercuts the very heart of who we are as a nation. And so let's take that whole picture, that panoply of pathologies you've just listed. When you're out, because you go out and speak all the time, like I do to voters, where does the economy rate? What are they telling you about the economy, and how it fits into this whole attack on America by the Biden administration?
Well, I just wrote, it's funny you should ask that, because I just wrote another column from the New York Post that was just published, and it was almost 30 years ago, almost to this day, that James Carville, remember him? He was the one who famously said, in 1992, "What's the election about? It's the economy, stupid." Remember that one? It's the economy, stupid.
Yeah.
Well, I think that most Americans get that here in 2022. What's this election about? It's the economy, stupid. And so when you see these, massive rates of inflation that are higher than we've seen in 40 years. And by the way, when I tell people, I go on Fox as you do, and I'll tell people we've got an 8 or 9% inflation rate, people get mad at me. They say it's not 8 or 9%. Most people feel that it's twice as high as that, because the things you have, essentials, Andy, the food, the gas, the ticket prices, the health insurance, all of those things are going up, 2 to 3 times higher than that. And so Americans are nervous, they're angry, they're agitated. Look, when you have 67% of the American people, 2 out of 3 Americans who say the economy is going in the wrong direction, that's a big problem for the incumbent party. So I do think you're going to see a red wave election. Arizona, by the way, I got to tell you, because your voters are going to have a tremendous impact on what happens nationally, in terms of whether there is a repudiation of what Biden and the Democrats have done. You've got a huge governor's race. And I have to tell you, Kari Lake, I wasn't even in the primary in favor of Kari. I was in favor of my friend Karen Taylor. But the more I watch Kari Lake, I think she's a phenomenal candidate. I think she's a star in the making. I love her poise. I love her charm. I love her, common sense values that I think she could be a national leader someday. So, and then you've got an important Senate race there too. So one of the reasons I wanted to come on your show is to just urge, the eyes of the nation are upon Arizona. Okay. You've got to deliver.
No, you're exactly right. And I would say, Kari's kind of won me over as well. I mean, I've watched her. She's with a calm demeanor. She can actually take the media and put them in their place, and that gets a big cheer from me. I'm like, oh yes, okay, that way to do it. Hey, let's talk about another piece that you wrote, and let's start it up. Paul, can you play that the 401k video, please?
Mm-hmm.
Since President Biden took office, monthly savings have collapsed, falling 83%. The average 401k plan had over $135,000 at the start of this year. Today, those assets have shrunk on average to about $101,000. In other words, the average 401k plan is down about $34,000, more than 25% in less than 1 year.
Hey, Steve, you wrote that, and they're quoting from you. I have to tell you that last Saturday, I got a text message with a screenshot of an individual who sent me this text message with their 401k statement. And it showed that they had lost over 30% of value in the last 12 months. And so people are, and he says, this is my retirement plan under Joe Biden, right? So, we've got here, and you remember President Trump, because he was concerned every day about how's the market going. He wanted to know. He was very interested in that. So, because he knew that I think that was a reflection of the entire economy, right? So, we're not even halfway through the Biden presidency. Where does this go from here?
Well, thank you for mentioning that study. It's gotten an enormous amount of attention, and I've had the same phenomenon, the same experiences you have. People are emailing me all the time and texting me that here's my 401k plan. Here's where it was when Trump was president. Here it is now. It's shrinking. And a couple of quick points on this. One is, I don't understand how anybody over the age of 50 would want to vote for these people, because I'm 62 years old, so I'm getting closer and closer to retirement, and so I'm looking at, am I going to have enough money, so that I can live comfortably. And so anybody over the age of 55 or 60, you're getting crushed. You're getting crushed because inflation is a tax on your lifetime savings, right? Since you started working at 20 years old, all of that lifetime savings just gets vaporized by this inflation. And so, the average, as you see on the screen, is down, I don't know, between $30,000 and $35,000. That's a lot of money for people who spent their life saving. Now, I want to make another point, if I could. Why are all these mistakes being made by Biden? Why did they do the most foolish things. Why do they spend trillions and trillions of dollars? Why are they not able to deal with the supply chain problem, which was not a problem when Trump was president? And you may recall, Andy, we also at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity did a study that got an enormous amount of attention that showed that the average person, employee hired by Joe Biden to deal with the issues related to the economy, transportation, commerce, finance, the average one has zero business experience. Now, I'm not saying they have zero experience running a business. These people have, on average, have not even ever worked for a business. They are either academics, they're community organizers, they are lawyers, or they are, people who've just done other kinds of thing, worked for universities and things like that. And that's a big problem, in my opinion. I don't think there's anybody in the Biden administration right now, certainly not Joe Biden, certainly not Kamala Harris, certainly not Pete Buttigieg, certainly not Jennifer Granholm. So, I could go down and down the list. None of them have any competence. It's not just they're ideologically wrong. These are people who are incompetent. I mean, is Pete Buttigieg really the person you would turn to deal with these incredibly complicated supply chain issues? He doesn't know anything. I mean, his qualification is what, a year and a half being the mayor of a small town in Indiana. So that very much concerns me. Even I didn't always agree with Bill Clinton's policies. I didn't agree with Barack Obama's policy, because at least I felt like there were some people there who were competent. Can you point to one person, Andy, in this administration that you would define as competent?
No. I mean, look at that cabinet. Look at the entire presidential cabinet, and then start looking at heads of departments and agencies as well, and what you're going to feel. I mean, look, you got the commissioner of CBP, who I think they're making a scapegoat because he falls asleep in meetings. I mean, come on. Joe Biden falls asleep in interviews. You got Commissioner Magnus falling asleep in meetings. So I have no confidence that they know what's going on. And I'll just tell you, this goes right into the head of the Federal Reserve. 4 months ago, Jay Powell said, we really don't know much about what causes inflation. Now, Steve, yeah, we do know what causes inflation. I mean, you just talked about what causes inflation. It's devaluing your currency. That is the classical definition of inflation. And then you throw on killing your energy supply when everything is done through oil and gas, and you say, okay, yeah, these guys don't know what they're doing. And I think you're exactly right. It's really disturbing, very frightening for an outside observer. We're all victims. I mean, I feel we're all victims to this. I know you've said incompetence. You're very generous. You're a very, very kind man. I look at it and I say, well, I could give 2 or 3 months of this as incompetence, and I did at the early stages. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is just they're trying to get their feet underneath them. We're almost 2 years in now. I view that as it's got to be deliberate. Nobody is that incompetent. I mean, just not to get too far off on this, but just never. I'll never forget the sequence of the inflation. You started seeing the inflationary pressures almost immediately. It said there was no inflationary pressure. Then it was transitory. Then it was, hey, it's a little bit longer than we thought, but it's good. It's good stuff. Yeah. This inflation, it's good for the economy. And now it's like, hey, it's structural. And then Janet Yellen said just last week, she said, hey, yeah, nobody really could have seen this coming. And by the way, it's just an international phenomenon anyway. I mean, I get really gassed by that, Steve. I feel like they're gaslighting the American public about this. And it gets to your point that you were making. Do you feel comfortable with any of the people that Biden has in his administration?
Well, you're exactly right. And just to set the record straight, that Jerome Powell was actually appointed by Donald Trump, although he was reappointed by Biden. And, every time I see the president, that is President Trump, I always say, that was the worst appointment you made. And he nods his head. So even Donald Trump didn't always get it right. But, he's a good example of, somebody who just, kind of I don't know, something in the water in Washington that people kind of lose common sense when they come. I want to make sure that your viewers can connect the dots here, and I'm sure that most people understand this, but I want to make sure everyone does. It's very concretely clear why we have inflation. We spent and borrowed and printed $4 trillion. Stop. And hard stop right there. It's not like, oh, gee, where did this all come from? I mean, you know where it came from. A seventh grade, that if you're going to flood the zone with trillions and trillions of dollars, that's going to reduce the value of the dollars you and I have in our wallets and our savings, 401k plans. I mean, it's obvious. So that means, Andy, that when you're over the Congress, and boy, one of the great days of my life will be when you pry that gavel away from Nancy Pelosi, finally. But your first responsibility, and I wonder if you agree with me on this, you have to start taking a chainsaw to this budget. I mean, we have to cut I think you're $1 trillion of cuts. We've added, and not just it started under Trump, under COVID. We've spent about $6 trillion. That has to be drained out of the economy. We're going to have 10% inflation for the next decade, and it'll ruin our country. So I hope that's your highest priority, is get budget. That's when I first came to Washington, we thought, oh my God, $1 billion of deficits. Now we're running trillions of dollars of deficits, and then nobody even talks about it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we have to start clawing back. We have to start clawing back immediately. And one of the places will be the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the spending that's there. It hasn't all gone out the door yet. It's time to start clawing that back and others. So on that point, Paul, will you play this next clip for us, please?
About the strength of the dollar right now? I'm not concerned about the strength of the dollar. I'm concerned about the rest of the world. Does that make sense? Yes. Our economy is strong as hell. In the internal. Inflation is worldwide. Worse off everywhere else than it is in the United States. So the problem is the lack of economic growth and sound policy in other countries, not so much ours. And that's how worldwide inflation. It's consequential.
In the end, I'm not sure I know quite what he said, but he was eating an ice cream cone and talking about inflation. He's more worried about international inflation, worldwide inflation, than the U.S. inflation. So, let's talk about the Inflation Acceleration Act. $700 billion plus, some monstrosity. You've done a great analysis on this. Tell us what you think of there's a whole set of targets here, but what's the worst few things that you can think of in this horrific monstrosity?
Well, first of all, let's just Joe Biden was saying there when I agree, it's hard to understand what he's saying these days, but he was saying, inflation is just a global phenomenon. It's an international problem. There's a couple problems with that analysis. For one, you have a lot of 7 or 8, industrialized economies that have lower inflation rates than we do. Japan doesn't have an inflation problem, Andy. So that doesn't really explain things. Number two, the United States, this great country of ours, we are the whole economy. Every other country is a spoke, right? And so essentially, when these have basically either formally or informally pegged their currency to the dollar, right? So when we have inflation, and I'm not a blame America first person at all. I'm just saying that the reason you have an international crisis inflation is because so many countries are pegged to the dollar because they've always felt it will, for the last 30 years, it's been a stable currency. And now it's not a stable currency, right? And so that's why you have many of the other countries of the world, because they've always thought, the dollar, that's going to be as good as gold. We can count on that. You can't count on it. And so you see what I'm saying? So all these other countries have inflated their currencies as well. Now,
If I can just interject real quickly, the one thing that keeps us somewhat on a right track is that we are the international currency of exchange right now. And there is no place else, because there are so few countries that have stability in their economy, and partly because they rely on us.
Mm-hmm.
There's no place else to park your dollars or your cash or your currency, right? I mean, you end up going to the U.S.
It's a great point you're making. And here's what worries me. If we keep on this path of 7, 8, 9, 10% inflation, how much longer can we be the world reserve currency? You're going to see people flooding. Now, it's not happening now. In fact, the dollar has been strong. You know, the way I like to put it is we're the least rotten apple in the cart.
That's the point. That's the point.
But still, I mean, I worry that you're going to see more and more people moving into like cryptocurrencies or other forms of currencies that are more stable. And so we got to get back to, you know, my buddy and your buddy Art Laffer talks a lot about the pillars of prosperity, and one of them is a stable currency. The reason you have a currency is that you want to be able to use it in a medium of exchange. You can't use it if you don't know what it's worth, you know, if it's changing all the time. And so I'm very concerned about that. Now, you are going to have a mandate from voters to get this debt under control. And I'm going to start with just saying two things. Number one, please, please, please stop the funding of these 80,000 new IRS agents. That is the most outrageous thing I've ever heard. I mean, truly. And I just went through an IRS audit, you know, and we spent thousands and thousands of dollars. And our you know, accountant said, just pay the money because it's going to be, you know, even though we knew we didn't owe the money. So it's like having your wisdom teeth pulled going through these audits with the IRS. And Andy, it is the one agency of government where you are guilty until you prove yourself innocent. If you come under an IRS audit, that's that. So in other words, the presumption of innocence is not there. So I don't want to see 80,000 new IRS agents, you know, knocking on my door. I don't want to go through that again. And I don't think too many of your viewers do either. Number two, there's $300 billion, not 300 million, $300 billion, what I call a green energy slush fund in the Inflation Acceleration Act. And that basically is being run by Democratic hacks. It's not about changing the climate. That money is going to be, it's a slush fund. It's going to be used to pass the dollars on to the groups that elect Democrats. You know, you and I were talking offline about, I asked you, why is it that Democrats have 2 to 3 times more money to spend on these elections than Republicans do? And I think you put it well. It's because they're converting federal dollars into campaign dollars.
That's right. Yeah. No, that's right. I mean, so that's a huge problem. And then they attack oil producers with another tax, right? I mean, so I find myself going crazy with this. So CBO said this bill would have a negligible effect on inflation in 2023. I think that's wrong. I think it's actually inflationary.
Oh, I totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, these people should be sued for, you know, mislabeling, you know, false advertising. Look, how in the world is raising taxes by $500 billion and raising spending by $500 billion going to reduce inflation? Again, I want to walk through this because sometimes, you know, there's a reason we call Washington, D.C. the logic-free zone. So if you raise taxes on businesses by $500 billion, is that going to make inflation worse or better?
Well, it will make it worse.
Yeah. Okay. Now, if you increase government spending by $500 billion, is that going to make inflation better or worse?
The same, worse.
Right. So they act as if these things counteract each other. No, you're reducing the supply of goods and services by raising taxes, and you're increasing the demand for goods and services with the government spending. So both of those factors increase inflation. You can be a nutcase to say that this is going to reduce inflation.
Oh my gosh, Steve. Well, you know, we've reached the end of the line for our time.
We just got started.
I know. That's the thing. I'll just tell everybody watching, you know, this is what's so great about Steve. He comes into Conservative Opportunity Society. He'll come speak to all kinds of groups of conservatives, because I think conservatives are the only ones that are really trying to get a handle on what's happening with the economy. And I appreciate what you do. You're what I call a public academic, a public economist. You're out there speaking, you're teaching. What you say is you provide this great deal of clarity about what's happening. I can't thank you enough. And I will tell people they need to follow you at Stephen Moore on Twitter. And then you've got something else that you put out every day. I wanted to make sure I could highlight it.
Good.
I can't remember
Are
what
you
we call
getting
it.
are you getting that hotline every morning?
I get the hotline every day.
I want all of your listeners and your viewers to get that. And unlike the Build Back Better bill, this really is free. It costs nothing. Right. This is something that is just, we put out 5 mornings a week, and it's very short, but it's people like you. I talked to Newt Gingrich the other day, the former Speaker of the House, said, Steve, this is the first thing I read every morning. And it's just a way of keeping up with the crazy things the Democrats are doing. So if people would like to get it, just go to our website, Committee to Unleash Prosperity, and sign up. And again, I'm not selling anybody anything. I just want people to understand what's going on in our country. And then if you like it, we'll send it to you. If you don't like it, just unsubscribe and we won't send it to you. But I think people will find some real value in getting that. Yeah,
and I tell you, I look at it every day. Okay. I find it very, very interesting, and I'm grateful for it. It's a great service. So please follow Steve. You can follow me on Twitter at RepAndyBiggsAZ, on Truth at RepAndyBiggsAZ, on Instagram at RepAndyBiggs, at Facebook, Congressman Andy Biggs, or www.biggs.house.gov. You can see us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. What's the Biggs Idea? Steve, thanks so much. I'll see you on the other side of the election, hopefully with just fantastic news going forward. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, well, I can't wait till you've got that gavel and you're running that subcommittee on the Judiciary Committee, because, I think you're and my, mutual friend, Jim Jordan, will be running that committee. You'll be running one of the major subcommittees. And so I think it's going to be a brand new era. And the people who've done this to our country, they need to be held accountable.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.